I've talked a lot about all the season finales of Power Rangers and how this and that were lackluster. I want to talk about something good for a change, and I completely forgot about the season premieres of Power Rangers, and a lot of them are very well done. Whether they're one part or two part, it seems Power Rangers always has better luck doing a single episode premiere versus a single episode finale.
The Mutiny.
Let's begin with probably a lot of people's most memorable premiere is the season 2 three-parter, The Mutiny. And like everyone, this was the peak, the craze of Power Rangers. We just came off this blockbuster, anomaly out of nowhere. How do you go from there? And this was Power Rangers' very first time where they were going to be dealing with this huge rigmarole of splicing between the Jew Ranger footage, the Die Ranger footage, and the US Jew 2 footage, which was a big and complicated mess throughout season 2. I think everyone here would also agree that Lord Zedd is one of the best villains that Power Rangers came up with, especially when he first began in the series, and the Mutiny did an excellent job of setting him up. Not only do we get his really odd appearance, no skin, I thought he was a very unique villain, although his Z-Putties were crap. I've never liked the Z-Putties. Even when I was a kid, I was like, why would you build in a weakness that was right in front of their chest that you could just punch after a certain amount of time? And it's also random, how much punches they can take. It's either 1 or 20. As for the episodes themselves, I did love the overall plot. Zedd coming in, we're going into a new section of Rita's palace. Rita gets thrown back into the dumpster, and Lord Zedd comes in and starts off with a bang. And also, not to mention, we get a new goal for Bulk and Skull. And I was kind of surprised at this because, Bulk and Skull were just kind of the comedy afterthoughts. What could you do with, bullies from, a high school setting? And they were like, well, let's see if we can have the Bulk and Skull find the secret identities of the Power Rangers. And I thought that was a really cool idea because this was such a big deal, not only because of fans, but because these 3 episodes were aired in prime time. So this was a really huge deal. Comparing season 1 to season 2, they were stuck with mostly Japanese footage. If they ever filmed anything in the suits, it was on a beach and they couldn't fight. And then all of a sudden, we're going into this, ATV dirt bike. Even though I love the Mutiny, I think it does have some issues. Obviously, because they were still dealing with the whole Jew 2 footage. It brought in a ton of issues, and I think the biggest issue of the Mutiny was that it was 3 parts. Honestly, it should have been whittled down to 2. Part 1 should have been focusing on Lord Zedd. They get rid of Rita, and then we go into the big, the Zords are screwed, and we have to go and get the new Thunder Zord power-ups. The problem is they wanted it to be 3 parts because they wanted it to basically feel like a mini movie, an hour-long premiere. But even though it had all these weird issues and editing problems, you still like it for what it accomplished in a premiere.
Beginnings.
Beginnings was another one of my favorite season premieres of Power Rangers. It was the beginnings of actually multiple things, not from just the season, but also the executive producer change behind the scenes with Bruce Kalish's run of Power Rangers. And I think the reason why I really enjoyed SPD's premiere especially is how different was it from all the past seasons? Yeah, we've had very drastic changes of shows from In Space, Lost Galaxy, moving from Wild Force and Ninja Storm to New Zealand. It was the very first time we got a time jump. Now, I understand Time Force started in the year 3000, but we got back to the present. This is the first time we take place in the year 2025. We got very different Rangers in this case. This season was very police-heavy themed, so it was going to follow a chain of command. Aliens were much more, prevalent in Power Rangers for the very first time. And also, not only that, we got really great sets. When we went from Dino Thunder, we went from a school setting, pretty much basic stuff that they shot on, to all of a sudden we got all these fancy high-tech stuff that we haven't seen for quite a while. The last time we can definitely say we had a high-tech stuff was Lightspeed Rescue. And I think the best of the best would be all the characters. Now, say what you want for how the characters progress through SPD, and I have complained about various issues from them. The main cast was probably one of the best casts Power Rangers have ever had. They came up with such great characters, and all of them had really interesting arcs. I really can't say that like none of them, besides the Ball of Light, got shafted throughout the season. Everyone had something to go with them, whether they took elements from their Super Sentai counterpart or they incorporated a lot of unique things from original stories, especially Z and Jack, so things that we never seen before where they got a second chance and became Rangers, especially Jack of all, because Sky had his major plot line that ran through the entire season of, he had issues with authority. He wanted to be the Red Ranger, but because of this arrogant side of him, he wasn't worthy of being the Red Ranger. And that's what I really liked about, all the characters, from their quirky natures, especially Bridge. Sid, even though she was, the spoiled rich girl, you're so brought up, you're so stuck up, and then, over time she learned how to understand, what's it be like to be an average person. And speaking of the show itself, is that SPD spent a lot of money to design all these aliens, and they really didn't have to, but they wanted to actually make the world feel alive, feel real, versus, oh yeah, we're Time Force, we're supposed to be from the future, but then we're just stuck in 2001 and they're just going on the sidewalk and fighting cyclobots. Now, Grum was not my favorite villain of all time. He was passable. I wish they did more with him, but as an introductory to Grum, this person that wiped out Doggy Kruger's planet, and, they formed the B Squad. The A Squad, B Squad story. Like, we've never done that before, where we actually had two different sets of Power Rangers, and we were following the underdog for a change. Also, the Deca Ranger footage really helped because Deca Ranger had a very unique design, and they wanted to bring back those 70 types of cop shows. So we had all these elements put together into one solid season premiere.
Beasts Unleashed.
Now, the Beast Morphers opening was a single episode, and I thought they did a really good job with the time they had. And I really liked Beast Morphers' unique story take on the Go Buster material. I think Ravi, Devin, all of them had really solid introductions. I think one of the more unique things was the whole, we were going to get, completely different Rangers initially, but because, Evox took control of them and created villains from them and avatars, it was an amalgamation of some of the elements from Go Busters. Ben and Betty, now, a lot of people don't really care for them either. They were still kind of annoying, but what we had before with Ninja Steel and Victor and Monty, 100,000 times better than what we were dealing with before. They were still goofy, but they didn't cross a line. But the main thing that I really liked about Beast Morphers was the whole, and they were using the morphing grid as a ultimate power source. Now, I thought of a lot of things that could have happened throughout the season that they ended up not doing. Like, I think if I remember correctly, I had guessed maybe the season finale would showcase, like, oh my God, we've been using this, the morphing grid's energy for so long, it was going to cause a problem to the grid itself. Maybe it was not going to function. Maybe it was going to collapse. Maybe things like that. I think all the backgrounds for the main characters were pretty good. You have to keep the secret identity. Devin, he wasn't such a reliable person at the start of the season, and he's the son of the mayor of the town, so now you have this problem of him actually doing something good, but because they have to keep it a secret, his father thinks he's not doing something good. So we have this big conflict that goes through the entire season, and Ravi has to worry about his girlfriend being unknown. Will she die? Will she not die? They have to save her. Even though Beast Unleashed was a quick season premiere, I think it was a very solid and redeeming season premiere from Ninja Steel.
Powers from the Past.
Powers from the Past, Dino Charge's season premiere. Now, just like Beast Morphers, they actually took their time to introduce us to all the characters. Now, technically, all the characters do appear in the first episode, but we only really get an introduction to Shelby and Tyler. They decided to focus on two Rangers. We get to see how the powers are, and we have a ton of mystery. We have the other characters that come in later on. Tyler, I thought his background was interesting enough. He lost his father. He had no idea what was going on, and he was just, in the right place at the right time. I think what was actually pretty interesting from Powers from the Past is that it's a very simplistic season premiere. There's not really much of a bombastic opening, especially if you watch Kyryuger. Oh, the very first episode of Kyryuger was like insane because we have so many characters in the interest. We introduce everyone, and everyone has all these backgrounds. And of course, like Tyler to King, their characters are very different. And I actually like that about Tyler the most, is that, for a fair bit, we had a lot of Red Rangers that were like, oh yeah, I'm gonna stop the bad guy. Oh yeah, let's get there, let's do it. And we had time to actually get to know Tyler and Shelby, and like, why did she want to do these things? Why does he want to do these things? I think also what was really good about having just the two characters in the pilot was that it allowed the Energem story to breathe, because we had to introduce us a lot of information, because in the beginning of the season, Keeper crash landed on Earth, and we found out he crash landed 65 million years ago. And the whole sledge thing with the asteroids, he was the one who caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, which was like, okay, that works perfectly fine in Power Rangers, and I wish it had stayed just to that and not what they did in the season finale. But, as a way to explain something that happened in real life in a Power Rangers way, I thought it was very unique. Although there were some things here and there about the villains I didn't care for, like how does everything still function after how many millions of years? That's kind of like a big stretch. The villains had a lot more harder case to build up because there was so many villains they had to introduce, so much stuff with Keeper. So it was a good idea to actually use that first 10 minutes to bring us up to date with these new villains and then bring us to the actual Rangers.
The Road to Corinth.
The Road to Corinth. Now, many people have a lot to say about RPM because it was the end of the franchise originally at this point. The producers didn't care what was done anymore. Ed Gazillion, did what he wanted, and he created this very, very different type of Power Ranger season, but not completely different. That's what I think that RPM got right. Now, a lot of people can't complain, it's too serious, it feels different, but I was like, the spark of Power Rangers was still there. Yes, the setting was apocalyptic. Earth was basically on its knees. Nearly everyone was dead. People were dying left and right, which was completely like, what? Like, Power Rangers is showing this? I remember the very first time I saw The Road to Corinth, and I was like, this is PR? Because we were so used to the dumbing down, especially with Jungle Fury, Overdrive, all those lackluster seasons, and we walk up to RPM and we hardly see the Rangers in the first episode. And like, that's weird. And it really worked well. Scott, Flynn, Summer, the villains. Okay, let's start with the villains. Well, I praise a lot of things. The villains did suck. Now, Venjix didn't suck. I liked Venjix for when he got introduced. It was like this weird cone tube thing, and that was our villain. I was like, but then again, I thought about it. I was like, well, I can't really complain about Venjix being a tube. After all, Zordon was in a tube. Our hero, our mentor, was a talking tube. So what's the difference? I'll let Venjix be Venjix and be kind of a hell ripoff in that sense. And he was a really good villain. Same goes for Tenaya 7. I was like, oh, we got, a serious villain, which was a very drastic different from Go Launcher's villains. Although they did drop the ball with the robot, the other villain guys, like Crunch and the other one, I completely forgot because they just didn't use them. But for at least Tenaya and Venjix, excellent villains. The setting of Corinth, I thought the whole dome thing, I was like, oh yeah, this is a cool idea. The world has ended. They have this dome, this rescue. I think starting off with Ziggy was a very odd choice. And then, of course, Dylan. It was interesting to actually start off with the second set of Rangers versus the first. In Go Launcher's case, they kind of did that. They did take the elements of how they initially started Go Launcher. Green was the initial, like, oh, it's them, and da-da-da. It's like, kind of follow that. But RPM has always been from a few characters' point of views, and it would be Ziggy, Dylan, and, of course, Dr. K. And they were very interesting. Dylan, like, he has no memory of where he was. Ziggy, again, we didn't know why he was outside the dome, and he's trying to be this good guy, but then there's still something going on. So there was a lot of mysteries. And of course, for what they had to deal with, Go Under was a very, very goofy season. So I was curious how RPM was going to handle it. And somehow they pulled it off. Yeah, there's of course still the zaniness, but they were able to incorporate a lot of more serious stuff in RPM. And I think a lot of people will always say, like, either Flynn is their favorite character or Dylan is their favorite character. And me personally, Dylan was my favorite character because, just like how Mac was the robot in this season, Dylan was the most emotional, even though he was partially, converted into a robot.
Force from the future.
Now, of course, Force from the Future is kind of a no-brainer. It's just like, we went through, 2 seasons of excellent PR. And then Time Force comes out of nowhere. Now, obviously, it got some free points for me because, again, I like time travel. Although it lost those free points pretty quickly after I realized, the season was not going to really focus on time travel. Now, to be fair, Time Ranger didn't either. But, for the aesthetics thing, I did like it. I did like the uniforms. I love the aesthetics of the year 3000, which sucked because they had all these cool designs. They took them over from Time Ranger and actually kind of expanded on it in a few places. And then, of course, we get introduced to the whole, dynamic of Wes and Alex. And, of course, Jen losing her fiance at the beginning. So I was like, that's never happened in PR before. And I think just like RPM did, where it kind of surprised us, Time Force did it as well. It was like, whoa, they killed a Ranger? So it was like the first time since arguably Zed or Astronema, where you're like, holy crap, the villain is actually serious. And not just that, we had Rancic, one of the most excellent villains out there, but then we had Frax. We had 2 really competent villains in one season. So, I think it raised the bar of Time Force. When you have really good villains and you set up like, yeah, we're going to kill a Red Ranger off in the first episode, everyone was like, oh my god, Power Rangers can do more. Jen, while she is the leader of Time Force, and she of course has to have that strength, but she has that vulnerable ability that I think everyone relates to, no matter who you are, because losing someone you love is probably the most horrific thing you could do to someone. And Jen had to go through it. And not only that, she got separated from her time period. They really don't have that much resources. They're in this world that they just really don't understand. Then you get like shocked by Wes, who looks exactly like your fiance, and you can't say anything to him. He would think you're weird. He would get confused. And again, he's not a Ranger. So it's a very complicated story to bring in PR. Usually whenever we had like a love story, it was kind of just like, it was there, you had your moments, and then they usually kind of forgot about it. This one was a really strong thread throughout the season, and I think that's what made Time Force very unique as well. A lot of things that usually PR didn't want to do, they actually did in this season. So you have really interesting characters. I like the entire cast. Some got neglected more than others. Katie, Lucas. Trip was my favorite character. Even though Katie didn't get focused on, I enjoyed her. Because again, all the characters were like, they had a serious side and a goofy side. Like, Lucas had his stinky episode. Trip, had his episode where he was just trying to be like, I'm the weakest one of the team. I want to get better. I think he's kind of the glue of Time Force, because you want to protect him like a brother. So I think Time Force, not only does it feel unique in all those other aspects, it felt more like a family. And Power Rangers didn't really have that for a very long time, because we had a family in MMPR because of them being together for so many years. So it of course became a family through those seasons. But we lost that every time we rotated between seasons. They had friendship and camaraderie, but that closeness usually only finally appeared near the end of the season, which unfortunately you lost. But Time Force really captured that. And I think that's why it worked so well. And it's also kind of like a mixture of Gilligan's Island. They're together, and the only people that they can trust is themselves. And on top of it, having this huge responsibility of getting Rancic back to the future, because he can royally screw everything up if he keeps tampering with things. I think that's why so many people love Time Force for all those aspects. It was Power Rangers through and through, but it was more.
Day of the Dino.
Now, Day of the Dino. Now, it's not because Tommy came back. Like I've said many times, I was tired of Tommy. Tommy, for me, was damaged after, like, season 2 of MMPR because he was so focused on... I liked him, don't get me wrong. I liked him as the Green Ranger, and I personally wish he stayed as the Green Ranger. But when they brought Tommy back, they made him become a full character, and we had this big mystery between Anton Mercer, Trent, and of course, let's not forget about our main heroes, Kira, Ethan, and Connor. Those 3 characters did a really excellent job, mainly because they felt real. Again, MMPR has its faults. The characters never felt fully real. There was always some, it's a kid show. They never have to be more realistic, more show you what like really would happen during a situation like that. Dino Thunder brought that in, which is what I like. The school setting was fine. I was like, okay, it's a nice throwback of MMPR. You can do it. Hasn't been done in a long time, so it was perfectly fine. And of course, we have our Bulk and Skull equivalents, Devin and what's her face. Bulk and Skull, I remember when I first saw MMPR, they were annoying. I didn't really care for them. They did grow on me, of course, and I did, appreciate Bulk and Skull later on in the years. But Devin and Cassidy, they were interesting from the start. Devin wanted to be more of the nicer, normal dude. He just wanted to follow a passion. While Cassidy had her passion, she just bulldozed everyone. She didn't really care about like what she did and she wanted to get done. So she was a really good, interesting foil for all the characters. But I think the biggest thing was the Rangers hated each other. 3 random people who have no chemistry with each other were basically forced to become Rangers because it was just by accident, and they had to work together no matter how awkward or strange that they thought of each other. Ethan and Kira and Connor were just not compatible with each other, and I thought that was a really nice, different take on Power Rangers, because usually the characters just get together and work together fairly easily. Sometimes it's jarring in certain cases, like in Lost Galaxy, when Mike died, when he fell down the crevice, everyone was screaming his name, and I was like, well, yeah, of course you're going to feel bad for him, but you're not going to be that emotional. It's kind of like they just immediately got attached, and I was just like, that's not really realistic. Those are those little aspects of PR that I wanted them to do better. And Dino Thunder did that. And of course, who can forget Mesogog, the best villain out there for PR. I think what helped him was also the Armor Ranger villains were not good. Yeah, they had explanations of why it was like that, but they were really not good. And when Mesogog came in, I was like, holy crap, you can have a villain like this who was basically on par with Zed's creepy nature, and he was actually more sick than Zed. That's the funny thing. I remember when Zed first appeared, and parents bitched and moaned. He's scary, he's freaky, I don't like him. 10 or so years later, we've had Mesogog, and where were the same parents today? Nowhere to be found, even though objectively you can say Mesogog was far more evil and worse. I mean, he abused his minions with this psychic beam that can cause pain. That didn't do that. Okay, this is a different villain, and it was also kind of like an apology, because there's a lot of things that people didn't like about Ninja Storm. I always had no problem with Ninja Storm, but I do agree they did go really close to that edge of this is becoming stupid. When DT came in, it's we went from that to wholly serious. Then we have the whole background of Smitty and Thing. I was like, what's going on with this? What did Tommy do? He was a race car driver, and all of a sudden now he's involved with dinosaur DNA. It's what? But overall, like I said, Kira, Ethan, and Connor, I think, are one of my favorite, archetypes of a Ranger. And I think that gives you much more richer stories that you can come up with. You don't have to have every single Ranger like each other. there should be some that are just, distant, which was Kira. She was the gothic chick, but at the same time, she was like, you could see that she wanted to have a friend, but she didn't know where to go, and Ethan and Connor helped her, and vice versa. Kira did many things for Connor and Ethan, especially Ethan, where he was very awkward. He loved the nerdy stuff, and he did a lot of pranks, which honestly, really good pranks. Yeah, Dino Thunder's fairly high on my list.
Quasar Quest.
Next up is Quasar Quest. Now, this was a big moment in PR because this was the very first time we no longer followed a cast through many seasons. This was a blank slate, and they set it off with a bang because, yeah, okay, a lot of people will be, disappointed when, Terra Nog got canceled and they funneled all that money from that second season into Lost Galaxy, which gave us this amazing scope because, besides the mega ship, we were stuck on Earth, and that's really all we saw. But all of a sudden, Lost Galaxy now is this humongous space station. We have a command center, we have a command bridge, we have officers, extras, Commander Stanton, all this new crazy crap, and we're gonna go to another world and all this, and what's going on? Why are people leaving Earth? And Bulk and Skull get separated, which was dumb. They might as well have just written them all out. And then we get introduced to our new main cast, which was all over the place, which was one of the coolest things. The Red Ranger was this, random guy who was a nice guy, and he was not picked to go on, Terra Venture. And, he snuck on. So he wasn't really a really good guy all the way through. So that was unique. And of course, we had Mike, Kai, Damon, Maya from a different world. We get introduced to us, of course, Trakina, Scorpius, all this weird bug stuff. It was a very crazy season premiere. And you don't really think about it now because we've gone through so many seasons of aliens here, fancy sci-fi this, SPD. But when the Lost Galaxy first came out, this was all brand new. And this was wow, we're going into space. We're not going to be on Earth anymore. Now, the only real complaint I have with Lost Galaxy is that why did they do it in the first place? It kind of makes sense in the idea of, so many monsters have attacked Earth. There were probably many people who wanted to get off Earth. That would be the kind of logic of why Terra Venture left. But then, how come we don't see that, continue? Why isn't there more Terra Venture-like stations going to other worlds? They just never continued it in the overall universe. So it's kind of a one-off thing that's I wish they kind of rectified. Bring it in more. Oh yeah, we have these long old elements that, let's talk about them. Let's use them more. Expand on. That's the thing that was very shocking as well. Just how RPM adapted Go Wander, and you're how did that work? Lost Galaxy adapted Gingaman. A very more nature-esque, simple Sentai season, and they were able to get it to work with the whole space theme. Especially the Zords. I think that was another aspect that I really loved about Lost Galaxy, because like I said, yeah, of course you're gonna appreciate the Zords of what they are and what they do for the team, and I'm not saying, Kim crying out when the original Megazord was blown up and she cried out for it. I was of course she has every right to be emotional. I felt sad too when that moment happened. However, they never really felt alive. They were more machines. This time, the Galactabeasts were actually they were real, they were organic, they were able to transform into Zords, but be organic, so they had their own story. The thing that I really loved about Lost Galaxy overall was all the extras. They were excellent with the extras of the stations, from the council characters, of course Commander Stanton. He had a whole episode given to him. When does that happen in PR anymore? We rarely ever get episodes that feature, the side characters. But for me personally, Lost Galaxy is a very, very, important piece of Power Ranger history. And it's the sole reason why I came back to the series. Because I think I've said it before, when Turbo ended, I quit. And I didn't want to come back, and I didn't watch Space. I had no idea what happened, and I wouldn't have cared if Power Rangers had gotten canceled or not. But I remember LG, in the reruns, because LG had finished and Lightspeed was airing. LG was in its reruns, and I just said, hey, you know what? It's been 2 years. Let me just go look at PR, what the hell they were doing since then. And then I was like, this is PR? We went from Turbo to this? What the hell did I miss? And then I went right back to the show, and that's what rekindled me. If Lost Galaxy wasn't good as it was, I would have not come back to PR.
From out of nowhere.
From out of nowhere, we went from clip show pilot of Turbo, because we had all that stuff in the movie, the Zeo powers that magically disappeared, to this. There's a lot of credit that Space has to give. We finally had gotten something good, and the first thing they dealt with was Alpha's voice. So many people complained about that voice, and they immediately got rid of it, and I was like, thank you. But then we actually, get into the meat and potatoes of the season. Andros, Zane, Astronema, oh my god, again, we were so used to Divatox being such an annoying ass on the show. And she had her moments, but for the most part, I was like, go away. Go away. You are not Rita, and even Rita was not Rita after a certain point. So we were stuck with a lot of villains that were becoming really stupid, especially being surrounded by stupid. Astromeda was such a breath of air, although I didn't understand why Elgar had to stay. But then we also got introduced to Ecliptor. I was like, wait, we have a general that's actually good and not ass like Goldar? Now, of course, the space elements, breathing life into the show. I think a lot of people didn't really care about the turbo stuff, cars and this and cars that. They were interesting, but we had seen so much stuff already. We were like, well, let's get something new, and luckily Mega Ranger delivered in that aspect. At least obviously Mega Ranger story could not be adapted. It was very different from what we got in space. And they actually pulled off a lot of stuff that was like surprising that they were doing, especially because the show was not in a good shape. Remember, we were at the point of it dying. Andros, the guy who got introduced to us in the pilot episode. Like, I never hated Andros, don't get me wrong. He was a good Red Ranger. I enjoyed him. I was always going to appreciate TJ more because, again, TJ's one of my favorite characters. So I was just like, he's the Blue Ranger now. He was red. And I was like, all right. It's fine, because TJ, unlike other characters in PR, he still was like second in command, so he still had his presence. So I was like, I didn't hate him, but it was still like, it was a downgrade. All the other characters, Carlos, Cassie, Ashley, they got expanded on, which was, good. It's like, yeah, because we didn't get that much time with them in Turbo, because they got thrown into the show at the last minute, so they got their episodes. But the biggest change, of course, was the tossing of Divatox and all her dominions. We actually have a threat, and we were like, where did Zordon go? He was captured. We had this big mystery, this problem, and of course, Andros' backstory. We had no idea what was going on. And we had this alien from KO-35, and his world was destroyed, from out of nowhere. Even though I actually didn't watch it when it originally aired, is an excellent season premiere.
Operation Lightspeed.
But above all the premieres, I think Operation Lightspeed, even though it's one single episode, is my favorite out of all of them. It was unique. I wouldn't say different, because we had many different characters in Power Rangers before, and of course after, but this was the first time Power Rangers was run by a organization and not Zordon, for example, or some sort of magical powers like the Quasar sabers. We went back to Earth. Lightspeed, comes out of nowhere and collects these, really excellent qualified people. That was another thing that was unique. Unlike, Rangers by accident, Rangers, choosing them, even though they had no skills, things like that. These were very competent people in their fields. And I think that's what made them more unique. They were more mature, more interesting that way. And of course, it still had the PR flair. Joel, of course, is one of those key elements. Of course, that comedy bit. Why I also feel like Power Rangers kind of was more unique than Lightspeed was because since it was an organization from Earth, this was the very first time that the team didn't care about their secret identities. They didn't. They were okay with showing them morphing in front of people. And I thought that was like, hey, something new from Power Rangers. We don't have to have every single team hidden. As long as either they don't have family or their family's protected. And I'm assuming the Lightspeed organization did that. They had no problem. So it gave you a fresh, take on something that we've seen before. Continuing on from like Lost Galaxy, because again, a lot of the elements from Lost Galaxy were pulled over into Lightspeed because they were like, we know we hit gold with that type, let's do it again, but expand on it in a different direction. And the Aqua Base was amazing. It was just like, we have a place that's underwater, and it actually has a plot point to the story. Of course, it also introduced us to a couple of new Zord designs, from trains, fire vehicles. And that's what I think I liked about the most, because it was the rescue aspect of it. Things that actually happen in real life. Paramedics, firefighters, police officers, things like that. All those rescue services. Everything from Captain Mitchell, Miss Fairweather. I think I would argue Mitchell and Fairweather are my favorite side characters out of all of the seasons, because they had interesting backgrounds. That whole thing with Joel, and of course Captain Mitchell's secret of his son and what had happened there. Speaking of the main cast, I think everyone got introduced. It was a fairly quick pilot, because again, it was a single episode. Would I have liked it if it was a two-parter? Yes. They could have done a little bit more on the Rangers' backgrounds. I think it would have been better if we had gotten a second part where, because like Kelsey, all we get to see is her climb up a mountain, and immediately she was hired to be the Yellow Ranger. And we really didn't get much time with her. Chad, same thing. Joel, same thing. It would have been nice if they had given us a little bit more time with the backgrounds of the characters, because again, once the main cast joins Lightspeed, their past lives are kind of ignored. Not totally, of course not. We do get to see more in later episodes, but like their professions, they don't really get to do as often. So I would have liked if the pilot was a two-parter for that reason. But even though with those little issues, the pilot was excellent. Oh, the villains! I've always loved the villains from Lightspeed Rescue, from Impus, Diabolico, Queen Banshira, who was hidden at the time. What we lost from MMPR Season 1 and that weird, sick nature of Rita and her minions was back again. We finally got demons, we finally got magic, some stupid things here and there, which of course is expected from Power Rangers. It's not going to be always serious. The only lackluster being Vipra, and that was the drop ball. Premieres for any show is extremely important because it gives the tone off. It gives all the information to us, whether we're going to like it or not. That's the problem with pilots, because there's so much relying on it, because you have to hook the audience to be like, is this a good show? Is it a bad show? Will this be good? Will it be interesting? You have to give them something. You have to give them action. You have to give them drama. So it's a very hard balance to get with Power Rangers, especially with PR, because there's so many things that you have to accomplish. You have to deal with the Sentai footage. Does things clash? You have to explain this. You have to introduce us to all the characters. So it's a lot to do. And arguably more important than even the season finale, because it just so much rides on that. Like, you couldn't sniff out, oh great, the season's going to be bad from just the pilot alone. It's just like when you watch Ninja Steel, you really don't have high hopes for the remainder of the season from that pilot. There's a lot of things in Ninja Steel's pilot that were like, oh god, here we go again. The dumbest thing was like Samurai, where we didn't even get to see the pilot. They decided to be like, you know what, the pilot's so boring, let's start with episode 3 and screw the pilot for nearly the entire year. So we didn't even get to see the pilot when it was supposed to air. And if you have a suggestion on what topic you'd like me to cover in a future video, leave a comment below and I may use it next time.